approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to request and make a motion that we move under 5C and have B go first, because we think that that's going to be a slightly shorter discussion. Get that out of the way and then move on to the rest of the agenda. I'd like to move that up to.
Okay, motion to approve the agenda with.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, approval of the minutes, February 20th, 2018. Motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve as presented. Second.
Second, any changes to the minutes? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have a presenter tonight, Bob. Here he is. I'm not sure how to say your name. I'm going to say Amelang.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and you're going to talk to us about net metering.
Yes. My name is Bob Amelang. I'm retired from CVPS in Green Mountain Power. I've worked there 26 years, and my career has been with utilities, utility industry. And while I was at CV and GMP, I was part of the team that was in charge of all of the rates and regulatory policies and power planning and so forth. So I have a lot of background in the power systems. And as part of that, I also got involved with some solar analysis there at GMP toward the end. So I've got a good background in this. I worked with a team with financial people, and so I have a good, here's another GMP employee. I have background, very good background in the financial aspect. I worked right alongside the person who set the rates, for example. We had a lot of discussions about how rates were set and what affected them, and what I'm about to tell you is nothing revolutionary or insightful on my part. We were talking about this for years, past few years. Solar net metering does raise rates, and there's a problem with that. So this has been well known for some time. One of the things that's come out though is that the net metering process has been programmed in Vermont has been very successful, and it's almost like they're the victim of their own success. They've grown so much, and it's gotten to be so large that there are some significant rate impacts occurring. So, and I'm going to ask if you go to the next slide, please. So this presentation is talking about solar, predominantly, only solar, because it makes up 95% of the net metering capacity, and we can ignore the other types like wind and methane. Excuse me. So what kind of projects do we have here? Well, there's three types. The predominantly, the largest one is the large remote one. And by remote, I mean it's away from the load. Typically, we see these projects in people's homes. Those are the customer rooftop projects. And they're the most plentiful in terms of numbers, but most of the growth and the capacity has all been with the large remote ones. These are projects that are away from the customer. And that's where the growth has come from. And there's a middle category here, which is the large ones that are the customer premises, but those are very rare. I guess Thomas Dairy is an example of that, where they're going to put a big site right behind the dairy, but those are rare. So what are the problems? Well, they cause rate increases, and I can explain that a little bit. By the way, I should take a time check. How much time should I allow? You said 10 minutes? 15 minutes? 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, and then that includes questions?
We'll go with that.
Okay, all right. Now the other part about net metering is that the customers who don't have net metering subsidize everybody else. So I'm paying a little bit more out of my pocket
for my electric bill because I don't have net metering. And at the same time, though, we can't just say we're not going to do any more net metering because we've made a promise in Vermont we're going to do it. But I think a good compromise position is that we would, my own thinking is, if we can back off on the large remote projects and allow people to continue to put on rooftop systems, you would lower the growth a lot, because 70%, according to recent GMP testimony, of the growth and capacity and has been from the large remote projects. And all right, it's interesting that GMP's testimony showed that they have the second highest solar capacity concentration in the U.S. behind Hawaii, which is sky high. So it's very high. The other interesting thing is there's this proceeding that's going on right now. So a lot of this data is very timely. It's been before the Public Utilities Commission, and there's been testimony by all the utilities, and they're pretty much in agreement with what I've been saying right now, that we've got to kind of back off. Let's find ways of not promoting so much net metering capacity, because it's got this huge rate increase. The reason why we haven't had rate increases is because we've had things like the GMP merger, which has saved costs. We've also shifted costs and so forth, put it further out into the future for political reasons to lower the rates impacts. But now that's gone. That's already baked into the rate, so we can't have that. We can't rely on that anymore. So if you could please go to the next slide. So as I said, most of the growth, 70% of the existing and proposed capacities from these large projects, typically 150 to 500 kilowatts, but some are even larger. And the price that's paid for these projects, these large remote projects, or any net metering for that matter, is much higher. Now the price does vary now. They've changed the rules. I don't have all of them in my head, but you get different adders for the type of system you have. For example, a friend of mine put in a solar project. He gets a 4-cent adder because he gets 3 cents for handing in his renewable energy credits. They get retired, and then another penny per kilowatt hour for being a rooftop. But the large remote projects do get a little bit less. They actually get a little bit of a reduction. So instead of getting 19.6 as my friend and all the other people have done with rooftop systems, they only get, the large remote projects get 17.6 now. But why is that bad? Because there are other large projects, like standard offer projects, that are paid much less. They're paid 8 to 10 cents. So that's where it's basically an easy decision. If you have to put in solar project in Vermont to meet our renewable goals, and you're putting in large ones, these large remote ones, then we should be putting in standard offer projects or utility scale. The problem is that the rooftop projects cost more to put on a house than you would have for a large remote project, because you have to get up on the roof. You don't have the same quantity of panels to buy and so forth. So it's much cheaper. So these large remote projects, they would typically get, they'd have to pay maybe a third to a half less per unit of energy or capacity than the rooftop. Yet they're getting the same price. They're getting nearly the same price as all the rooftop projects are getting. The other thing you have with a large remote project, you have a lot more undesirable impacts because the developer takes a cut of the savings that occur. There's a lot of admin costs on the part of groups like you to analyze them. By the way, I've had some personal experience with 2 large projects in the New Haven area. I worked for the town of New Haven that intervened at the Public Utilities Commission to fight against the onslaught of the multitude of solar projects. that are being put in that area. And that has to do with some of the other undesirable aspects of these large projects. And also this applies even to the standard offer projects. What we have in Vermont is we have a limited amount of land that's ideal for solar projects that are the large ones. You need unforested, open, relatively flat land, and you need three-phase power lines. And you don't have three-phase power lines along every road. So the combination of those two has led to the situation where Addison County is like the mecca for solar energy. So there's a large concentration, and in large part, the large remote solar projects there have caused the problem. And it's led to overloads that are going to occur. In fact, I testified about one myself. They're going to be overloading the transformer in one of their substations because they just have too much power there. And I was going to draw a diagram, but I don't have limited time, having to do with small and large pipes. But basically what it has to do is, if you have a lot of solar capacity on a circuit, it pushes the power back into the system, and maybe I'll wait till we'll get into the next slide. But the other thing I want to point out is the large remote projects actually have duplicate equipment. They install extra transformers that you wouldn't have at a customer site. Plus, they cause more. They can cause more energy losses because they're remote from the load and they tend to be concentrated. And again, it will take too much time to explain all that. But if we could go to the next slide. This is a little graphic about the system. We have basically three parts. We have the generation part of the system, the transmission, and the distribution. So all of these projects will be located out in the power lines. These are the three-phase power lines you need for the large projects. And in contrast, if you'd be at your house with solar, you would have it right on the house. The difference is, this transformer here, they call it a drum, but it's transformer drum. It's the transformer that steps down the voltage. You would not replace that if you put it on a rooftop system. But if you put a remote system on, you do have a duplicate set of transformers, which also cause losses. They cause energy losses just sitting there, by the way. The other thing you have is you have more losses on the lines here. And this is a very simplistic setup here, but you could have, for discussion purposes, a large remote project way out here, and you'd be shipping all the power to the house, or you'd be shipping it back into the system. And that's where I'm talking about the higher losses. It increases the amount of power that flows back into the system because the customer can't absorb it. And I'll just have to leave it there because that's a little bit, that's about as far as I can go. All right, the next one, please. All right, and here's some of the pieces we're talking about. Typical rooftop unit, there's the transformer. The transformer and then the line that goes into the house is what stays there. You just install the panels and some other equipment. And next, please. All right, this is an example of what's put on the house. This meter was already there, and this is the inverter that goes up to the panels, and you can see the nice shiny conduit here. There's a new meter that's associated with the generation. But this goes right back into the house. There's no more additional equipment other than this inverter and the panels and this switch and meter. Whereas with the other projects, there's duplicate transformation equipment and some wires and poles. Okay, next please. So here's a project. This is actually a standard offer project, but it's essentially the same as you would have with a remote net meter project. You have the panels that can be at the ideal angle for getting the maximum generation, and you can use equipment to install them and so forth. So the cost of these projects is essentially the same as what you get with a standard offer project. Okay, the next. And there's another example of the transformers that you have. These are the three-phase transformers, okay. And again, you have, this is some other equipment that you have at this large remote project. Okay, now we're gonna get into some numbers here. I'm gonna talk about the residential rate here, because it's the simplest one. You folks all pay electric bills. You have two charges. We all have two charges at GMP. We have a fixed charge per day, and we have a variable charge, called the energy charge, which depends on how much energy we use. GMP only gets 6% of their revenue from a fixed rate. That means if we all went net meter tomorrow, GMP would only get 6% of the money to run their system, and that's not sustainable. It just can't happen. This only covers a small fraction of what they need to run their system. So, next, please. Okay, now here's what we have: net metered customers, what they get, and what we all pay. So, this part here is 50.6 rate just changed this year that we all pay for our energy. And the recently installed net metered customers get that 56 plus the 4-cent adder. And again, the large projects get only like a 2-cent adder. It depends where they're sited, what that adder is, but it's something less than 4 cents, but it's still a lot less than what you could buy it from another large project. The key point is that when you put up a solar project, you don't like go out and take down poles and sell them for scrap because they're not needed anymore. You still need the entire grid. You know, it's got to be there. And this charge, this 15.6 charge, itself is only a small amount. I calculate about 40% by doing some rough calculation from a rate case. It could be even less than that. In other words, when you generate a kilowatt hour of solar energy, it doesn't save the 15.6. It saves something like 6 cents. The rest of this is what's needed to pay for the infrastructure. You got to pay the bonds and the stockholders that own all this equipment, which is massive. And the other point is, everybody pays for this whole 15.6 plus the adder. All the customers pay the generators this amount. And it's not coming from the GMP stockholders, it's coming from us as customers. So the next, and here's an example of over time what's happened. We have had, this is very interesting too, about the same amount of money per kilowatt hour has been paid for net metering generation since 2010, when we first had the big growth started the program. It was 20 cents mandated, which was 14 cents of, that's a GP rate plus another 6-cent adder. There have been some adjustments along the way where their adder went down to 5.3 and so forth, but now we're at 4 cents essentially for the most common rooftop system, but the rate itself went up to 15.6. So we're about at 20 cents. In this span of time, from 2010 to 2018, we've had tremendous drop in solar panel costs because of technology. It's similar to the computer chip industry. They can save a lot of money over time with new technology and so forth in manufacturing. And so that's shown up in the large projects, which in 2010 had to get 30 cents a kilowatt hour to make money because they were more expensive back then. That rate came down to 24 cents. I just threw that in because I didn't need one. Now the latest ones, there's one that's slightly over 10 cents. It's a little under 11 cents, I think. It's the most recent one that came in 2016. And utilities have gone out to bid to buy large projects, and their range is like in the 10 to, even less than that, 8 cents to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can see, if you've got to put in solar, put in the large utility scale projects, they're essentially the same thing. They're typically 2 megawatts rather than maybe 400 or 500 kW projects, but they're still the same thing, same type of project. Okay. Next, now here's an example of what you get into with having too much solar in one place. This is the GMP solar map, but it's actually got the whole state in there. And the red is a danger or an overload situation where the amount of solar that's there already. Again, there's a little bit of wind in here too and some methane because solar is 95%. But this is the Addison County area. You have New Haven and Virgins there. There's some other places too where they're red circuits. That means they can't have any more, any substantial more net metering added, or any large project for that matter. And the next slide is just a blow up of that red area where you can, it's kind of hard to see with the color they got, but the substation is a block, the one that we actually identified and overlooked. And it was discussed, by the way. There was a GMP representative at this hearing. And he acknowledged, yeah, it was close. He kind of argued that, you know, they wouldn't maybe get there right away and so forth. And talked about that. But the issue's there. It's an overlook. I mean, that's the way it is. The other thing that I can tell you, a personal story, I was told, and I actually got the email from somebody who applied for a net metering project in the town of New Haven. He had a large business, he wanted to put up a big roof array, he couldn't do it because he was told there was too much solar already in the New Haven area, and that's because of the high concentration, like I said, flat land, open land, also landowners who like to lease their land because they're not getting a good return from agriculture. Okay, the last slide here, just give you an idea how much solar varies in terms of output. This is daily energy production for the whole state of Vermont, load, and if that load was provided by solar. In other words, if we just added oodles of solar capacity and supplied our load, this is the area, this area here is April and May of last year. And actually the highest generation is often in the spring, April and May. So here's where these lines, you can see how they go down a lot. That's because solar varies, we all know that. The blue line is the Vermont load. And again, this is a daily average basis. This other part over here, though, is in contrast the winter period where the state of Vermont peaks and the average load is higher. And I'm also leaving out the hourly variations, which really can even much greater than this. But to get all this data here, I had to go with daily. You can see a lot of times where there's like no solar generation. This, by the way, came from an example rooftop mounted house in my neighborhood. And we had so many snow days where the snow covered up the collectors and the panels. So you go multiple days without any generation. Some of the larger projects will do better than this, but this shows some of the issues you run into. And because we have these large swings in generation relative to load, that also causes more energy loss. So I think that I'll have to stop there and see if there's any questions.
Okay, we'll have about 5 minutes for questions, and then we're going to have to move on. Okay, Annette?
So Bob, we've reviewed various sizes of solar projects here at the Rutland Planning Commission. And for instance, we'll be asked to look at a 500 kilowatt project in a remote area. And does it mean that if that gets put up and there isn't enough capacity on the grid, that homeowners who live in that local area could be shut out of net metering?
Yes, that's precisely what happened in New Haven
So,
because of that.
So that means that when we look at these things without the information about how much capacity is available on the grid, we're kind of doing it in a vacuum.
I'd say so, yes, yeah, and you really should be told how much is on that circuit, how much other solar capacity is that meter capacity. Or renewable, I should say, distributed generation is the technical term, but it tends to be mainly solar.
Hi, Don Richardson, Holly. What impact do you think the advent of batteries is going to have on what you just described?
Batteries will help. That will alleviate some of the fluctuations you get into, yes. And GMP is probably looking at that, but that won't be a total solution in the sense that when you have very high loads, like the Vermont peaked, again, our system peaks in the wintertime, and that happened December 29th last year. There was a whole string of time where there was just like no solar generation, and you need days, not hours, but days.
Full disclosure, I'm on my third year of net metering, and I just went through, prior to yesterday, 6 days in a row with zero production.
Oh, really?
I live in Mount Holly, that's a different
Oh,
planet.
yeah, that's Vermont. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Carol behind you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just on all these panels and everything, what's plan B? Recycling? You got batteries you're talking about, you got solar panels, and those are full of toxins and leads, and there's no plan in the whole United States. So what's plan B?
I don't know much about that aspect. I know there is some concern about that.
Shouldn't we be addressing that now? Because I've read in the year 2050, the world is going to see between 30 and 50 million tons of solar panels that are ready to go. And I don't think our generations, I probably won't be here, most of us won't, are going to really be happy to greet that problem.
I know there's more and more people talking about that. The other issue is the generators and electric cars have a lot of
There's another problem, electric cars, they have big batteries in them.
the rare earth metals, which are problematic to mine too, so there's that aspect. Yeah, that's a good point.
Fred?
Yeah, Fred Nicholson, Rutland Town. The map where you showed the areas of the state that were in danger of overload, Addison County probably is overproduction versus a lack of capacity. How about the other two areas, one up in the northeast and one down lower Connector River
Oh,
Valley?
yeah, if you don't mind going
Yeah,
back.
I'm trying to find that.
There's also, in part of Vermont, there's even worse cases of wind projects and some other things where they're actually shutting down wind
Is
production.
it overgeneration or is it lack of capacity, line capacity?
Well, it's over generation versus load. It's the issue is with you have to match load and generation. And I didn't mention one thing about Addison County. The rural areas don't have a lot of load usually, so that speaks to that issue. You don't have a lot of load to soak that up. But there are other parts of the state that have the same problem. They're rural, and it also has to do with the smaller lines that are there too. Yeah, that has an aspect, and the lower voltage. So they can be solved, but again, they're very expensive to upgrade to fix.
In the northern part of the state you're talking about, there's 430 megawatts of generation that's been built, and the total load in the area is between 20 and 60 megawatts, on average 35. So they've just built too much generation in an area that can't use it.
Oh, that's a huge disparity, yeah. Thank you for that, yeah. Can't get back to that. Oh, okay, well. Oh.
All right, well, I think we'll end on that. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have another quick question?
Just what is your advice for communities who are going to be, who might have large projects in their future?
No, I would say only support the utility scale and standard offer type of projects, but ask for more information too, as from the utilities. in terms of the impact it'll have on the grid. Like I talked to a Belco engineer who told me, yeah, definitely there'll be more higher energy losses. You have to find out, make sure that the cost upgrades are not going to be for the infrastructure. There are some issues with these large projects, and this is more of a technical legal area, where some of the upgrades can be paid for by all customers in the state. Theoretically, that the developer should be paying for all upgrades. But I would definitely ask to make sure that any system upgrades are going to be paid for by the developer. And you can also just ask the general question, will that have anything to do with reliability? And have them speak to that, because there are some reliability issues that are just way too technical to get in here. But yeah, I would ask questions like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
All right. Thanks.
So here's, I got it. So, sorry.
There it is.
So Rutland would be the lower red there.
Well, yeah, I think there's some in the Rutland area.
Fairhaven, West Haven,
Yeah.
Fulton.
Is that Rutland Town?
That's 11 right there.
So that's Clarendon, part of Wallingford, and up Shrewsbury's in yellow.
A few trees up
Now
there.
you guys are in the red.
Yeah.
So the red along the Connecticut, that could be hydro?
There could be some hydro that could contribute to
Well, I
that,
know
but
there's
that's
several
still
dams
mainly-
there on the river, so.
Yeah, oh, the hydro would be connected at the higher voltage, though, generally, yeah. And that's particular.
Thank you, Bob.
All right.
Very good, thank you.
All right, so we're gonna move into our first discussion, an Act 250 application, Rutland Regional Health Service, and visiting nurses and hospice of Southwest Region. Construction of a 1,500 square foot addition and parking lot for 30 vehicles on Albert Free Drive. So Ed is gonna share some details of that project.
Okay, so we have the hospital right here, Albert Street coming back, and then here's the building up there. And you can see from the packet, I think I put some site plans in there. Street view. But the thought is, thank you. So the addition is going to come off the back of the building right here. It's not a large one, and then they also own a lot here where the parking will extend into. It's a minor, and unless there were comments received by yesterday, we will go over to it. So staff recommendation is no significant impact. And then you guys can decide on the type of letter.
Do we have a recommendation for a letter?
Cutting some trees.
Yeah, a little bit back here and then back here as well.
And there's no natural resources issue.
No, nothing sure about that on our atlas.
So letter one, no regional impact.
Actually, I believe that the hospital serves the whole area, and I would say that it does have regional impact, but I would still say a letter 2 with an attaboy.
Okay, so we have,
So, letter 1 is no significant regional impact, letter 2 is significant regional impact. But like Fred said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it could be a good thing, so we could do a letter 2 with a positive comment.
I'll withdraw the letter one.
okay, so we have a motion for a letter 2. Do we have a second?
Yes.
Okay. Any more discussion, questions, comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I think there's several people here to speak to the Section 248 discussion. Can you raise your hand if you're here to discuss that? 1, 2. Anybody else behind me? 3. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to discuss it as and somebody 4, I don't care how many, I just wanna make sure I get you all. So we'll have Ed kind of describe the, project to us. I'll ask board members to ask questions first, and then I'll take comments from the public, if that's okay.
Just a quick question, this gentleman seems to be recording this, is that,
Yeah, it's an
everybody-
open meeting.
I understand that, but it's nice if everybody is aware of it.
Okay. I had my cough drops, so, okay.
Okay, so I have handouts, which let me know when you want these passed out. I think you have handouts. And this is Sam, how do you pronounce your last name?
Sam Deland, if you're from Montana.
He's actually the developer, so
Developer,
I think we
okay.
can let him describe the project.
Oh, okay,
And
good.
then if you have handouts, and Dave, if you want, let me know when to pass these out.
Anytime.
When I just do it now.
Okay.
And Sam, if you want to start.
Sure. And you can get an email from my colleague.
I haven't seen them in the last.
I didn't realize there's.
Okay, you can pass those out and I'll pass these out.
Hey Ed, the email one I gave you is actually Mr. Blake, who's right behind you here. Are you okay with that being passed? Okay.
Do you think you gave me enough, or should I make copies?
Oh, I think there's 20 each there, so.
If that gets entered into comment, then I will not put it before the time of my comment.
I'm sending those around that way.
All right, so 5 to 10 minutes?
Yes, yeah, I'll leave most of the time for discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Well, again, I'm Sam Deland. I'm a project developer with Conti Solar. So thanks for having me today. My intention was just to introduce myself and kind of describe the project. We haven't applied for permits yet, but as you know, we did submit our 45-day notice, which is a requirement before you would apply for a CVPS permit. So again, I'm Sam Deland. I'm a project developer with Conti Solar, and to give you a quick background on our company, so we've been a developer and builder of solar for about 10 years. We're part of a larger engineering company called the Conti Group, which is a 110-year-old family company. We have different types of engineering units, but I'm in our solar division, and we both develop and build projects. So we, kind of find opportunities like the standard offer program, find sites for solar, and then we're also the ones to build them, and usually to maintain the project as well. In Vermont, we have built a project. It was the Elizabeth Mines project, which was actually a 5-megawatt project. So that was kind of an unusual project that made use of an old brownfield. This project is actually a great introduction. This project is a standard offer program. So what that means, instead of kind of getting that 17-cent rate, which is the net metering rate, it's a competitive process, and the project size is slightly larger. So instead of half of a megawatt or 500 kilowatts, it's 2.2 megawatts. So instead of 3 acres, it's about 12 acres is the project size. And because it's competitive, like Bob before me was saying, it's the rate that we get for the electricity is much lower. It's kind of a more efficient process. We sell the power directly to Vermont's utilities, and I think Bob was talking about 17 cents for the net metering. I think this year the winning projects were right at about 9 cents. So it's it's producing solar energy like the net metering projects, but it requires much less of a subsidy. So it's kind of a direct transaction between the developer and the utilities. The RECs are being sold in state. The power is being purchased by the utilities, and it's generally more efficient. So that's kind of the program. The next page, I'll go quickly. I know in Rutland County and in your towns, you've seen ground-mounted projects. This would look similar. It's the racking would use driven posts in the ground, so it's not displacing a whole lot of earth. We would use a pad-mounted inverter. For this project, we would use one inverter that's about the size that you see on the page. And then those bottom two pictures are just, completed solar projects from different angles. One of them is the Elizabeth Mine project in Stafford. So the location, if you want to,
I'm gonna put the lights here, so.
okay. Good. Ed, I was gonna say if you want to, punch in 508 Country Club Road,
I'm just gonna zoom in.
or you could, yeah.
So just to orient everyone, Rutland here, going up, Brandon in here, and then coming into town here, and here's the center Forestdale here. Is that it, Sam, right in there?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So here's Park Street Extension.
Yep.
This is Country Club Road here. That should be golf course.
So that is our project site. As you can see, it's two agricultural fields. There's a wetlands feature in the middle of it. There's a large wooded area on the west and kind of to the north. And that intersection is kind of the end of Park Street Extension and then Country Club Road running north-south. What we look for in a site, for a 2 megawatt project rather than 500 kilowatts. It's fairly important to be close to the substation. Interconnection for these projects usually requires direct communication with the substation. So if you're 3, 4, 5 miles away, that's likely going to be cost prohibitive, especially for in this program it's competitive. So I think 12 solar projects bid in, and this past year only 3 were accepted. So it's in terms of siting, you have to be efficient in terms of the cost as well. The next, I guess you can just keep the map view. The next page is existing conditions of the site. So obviously it's, in the past few years it's been farmed for corn. I think the top 2 pictures are from Country Club Road, and then the other 2 are from Park Street Extension. And then the next thing I wanted to show you guys, so in this land works document, so this is the view from the intersection. But basically this design was to show you guys what we have already planned for the landscaping plan. From talking to, town officials and also, kind of looking at the view shed. We thought the view shed from Country Club Road was kind of the most direct. The road is slightly elevated, and if you look, yeah, it's elevated slightly above the project site. So we've done a few things. The first, in this layout, we've kind of maximized the part of the project that's going to be built in the western field. So if you look in that eastern field, it's a much larger setback. I think the requirement is, from that type of road, is 50 feet, which is, not very much, but this is much larger. I think it's about over 4 times that. And as far as the screening, the feedback when we met with the Planning Commission was kind of having a solid barrier visually, and then also something that would be a screen in year 1, instead of taking a few years to build. So, our preliminary landscaping plan, we're working with a Vermont landscaping company, is to use a willow screen kind of on the outside of the project. And if you guys, I apologize for these being black and white, kind of had last minute travel changes today. But we have pictures of some of these plants, and what we're trying to do is use the willows to provide immediate screening. I don't think they would completely block the project, but that would, they would provide screening year 1. And then on the outside of the project, we would plant, native species of trees. So on the south side, we would plant maples, which would have really pretty colors in the fall. On the east side, we're planting some red oaks. And I think at that corner where the property line ends, we've, planning for some pine trees.
So, is there any last minute things that we really need to know, because our time is kind of, I want to give
No, I
Or
understand.
can we start with questions?
Yep, I think we can go ahead, but just to give you the update, you know, we've put in the 45-day notice. We've met with the town of Brandon, and we have yet to actually apply for the CPG.
All right, so we're gonna ask board members for questions. Okay, Annette?
So I have two questions. When did you receive the standard offer contract?
So we executed it in December of 2017.
And you have 2 years to complete it.
Correct.
What is the grid capacity in that area?
GMP publishes that. That's one thing we looked at when we were selecting a site. So we've done one study with them, and there was, we would have to extend the three-phase from that road, Route 73. But in terms of capacity, and it looks like there'd be no technical issues.
Well, I don't mean for your project, but if you put that in there, does it use up the grid so that homeowners in the area couldn't do their own net metering?
For small net metering, it's unlikely to have that effect. It could.
So, following up on that conversation we just had, we now need to know what's the overall grid capacity and what's left over if you put a project in like that. And I have one other question. You had the bid on this standard offer contract. When did you bid?
I think it was May of 2017.
Did you go to the town of Brandon in advance and talk to them about it?
No.
Why not?
I guess for this site, we were looking at a few different sites. It took longer than expected to get a site under control. We did look at the town plan beforehand, but we did not have a conversation with the town before submitting the bid.
So this is a problem with standard offer contracts, and I think it's something that you as a developer can learn from and do better, because once you get your contract, then you're locked into the site. And we need more collaboration with developers and communities, and we really need the developers to come to the community and talk to them about it before you've locked the site in. That's just helpful advice I hope you'll take as to heart.
Yes.
Will you be able to address the grid capacity question in the petition?
Yes, we will.
Questions?
I'm interested in your guesses.
Yes, me too. Just want to make sure.
Yep.
Okay, let's start. I think you were interested in addressing the board or the
Sure.
developer,
I'm Stephanie Jerome, and I'm the chair of the Brandon Planning Commission.
Great.
So yeah, we have a number of concerns about this project, and there's a number of them that are just so aesthetically, it's very near the center of our town, but also we are concerned about the agricultural use. It's been used, taken out of use, and so the agricultural use is gone of that property. The screening, although they've done a good effort trying to screen the project, it's screened with non-native willows that are fast growing, and our town plan specifically asks for native species. And also, so then there's that, but then realistically, there's homes, you couldn't see it from how you portrayed when you looked at the property on the map, but there are neighbors that are above this field, and they will constantly and forever have a view of this large solar field. So virtually impossible, from our perspective, virtually impossible to really shield it from all aspects. There's a property on the west of the field that's not screened. So and that's sort of generally there's our areas of concern.
Okay, so he's going to pull up the soil on the atlas. Yep.
Dave Atherton, town manager in Brandon. We have had quite a bit of discussion on this, and I've had quite a few concerned residents in that area come to us. We had a select board meeting, which I don't have the minutes approved yet, so I didn't really want to bring them to you, but the newspaper article is pretty accurate. I think we've done a really good job in the last few years with siting solar in Brandon, working with the developers to have it out of sight, because we're certainly supportive of it when it's done right. And this is really the first one that's come to us that we're not real comfortable with, just to where it sits with, you know, the proximity of downtown, with the golf course, with the condos that are right there, and the folks that live on Country Club Road. We're really concerned about that.
Let me just add, Brandon's done a really great job of citing our other solar projects in old quarries, old gravel pits, in really out of the way spots, fields that are in more forested areas so we really have had very, very little visual impact of the solar development that's been done in town. So and I think Dave's right that the town has done a great job of monitoring and finding great spots for these type of projects.
What does Brandon have for zoning?
What do we have for zoning? Our zoning administrator's here.
Yeah.
Land use ordinance, we have subdivision, we don't have actually any regulations, or very minimal regulations when it comes to solar in the land use ordinance. Our town plan was updated with some of the solar, discussions of, making sure that there is good sightings, but we are starting to work on our energy plan. But the land use ordinance.
So I guess my question I'm leading to is this in violation of anything that you have in
Not
regulation?
in the land use ordinance, no.
But in our town plan, we specifically say, it is stated that we don't want to use existing agricultural lands for solar projects, and it must be shielded from view.
So this wouldn't fall under a preferred site in your town plan?
In your plan, is those regulations or those stipulations aimed at solar only or all development?
Solar.
Okay, that's not going to stand up in court. I'm Rutland Town, I can tell you from...
I have another question over here.
From personal experience, that will make...
So, I got two questions. Dave Allaire from Rutland City. Has any of the other projects that have been built up in Brandon been built on any agricultural land? Let's say they're screened and they're out of the way, but have they been built on agricultural land?
Isn't
Any projects?
Is Davenport planned on agricultural land?
Is that the, yeah, and that is,
It's not in Brandon.
It's not written.
Most of it's in Brandon. I thought most of it was in Pittsburgh.
No, it's all
That's
Brandon.
all
It's all,
Brandon?
yeah.
so that,
Corrected
that's
there,
what,
don't I?
But it's certainly not, it's not prime ag there, I can tell you that. It's all hard
it's
clay.
not on a road that's traveled, that cars, that you can see it. It is a very large project.
And the only reason I asked that is just to see if this is different than what's existing.
Well,
The
we've
ones
got,
we've recently passed have not been in prime ag, if I'm remembering those correctly.
we've had,
And the Norris Brothers was on the old gravel pit.
Right.
And then the one we just reviewed on the Green Lantern project.
Lamore,
Yeah, that was also
Yeah.
not prime ag.
and that's quite a distance from a main road too. Like we did one in an industrial park lot
Right.
that was ledge. So,
Yep.
yeah, and the developers have been great to work with on it too, so.
All right, I'm gonna ask
Thank
the
you.
other guests to comment or ask questions, and then I'll go back to the board for questions. Just wanna make sure you guys, yes, sir.
My understanding is there will have to be a fairly significant upgrade to bring three-phasing from basically over by the police station and the ledges by Foley, is that correct?
Yes, that would be paid for entirely by the project.
But that'll then add to more of a view sort of situation for, there's nothing there now to speak of, just a single little wire versus bringing in three-phase just to add to it.
Yes, sir. My understanding is that there will not be new full locations, but yes, three-phase would need to be brought down Country Club Road.
My understanding is that we're gonna be larger poles because they are three-phase, what they're gonna have, which are the different ones they're currently.
It's possible. We haven't finished the interconnection studies.
And where would that come from? This is Country Club Road here.
The three
Right
phases
in
on
there.
Route 73.
Okay,
By
so
the
come
Gulf.
off of here.
Right
down the
there.
road.
Correct. There's a single phase power line and it would, basically that portion would be upgraded to 3-phase to reach the project site.
We have about 5 minutes left. Yes.
I have a three-part question. First of all, the end of October, all the leaves fall off the trees, so I would look at evergreens if it goes through. Also, how long does your company plan on owning the project? And at the end of the project's life, who's going to be responsible for cleaning it up and responsibly, again, recycling the panels?
Yes, sir. So Vermont's permitting procedure requires a decommissioning bond. So it's kind of more, I think it's a good, it's a good feature, but it's a higher requirement than a lot of other states. So we would have to come up with the cost estimate for decommissioning it, and then put up a letter of credit for that amount. And you have to kind of not include scrap value and show that adequately covers the cost of removing the project. And then whoever is operating the project, it would likely be my company, would be responsible for keeping that letter of credit to hold the permit.
Because I have heard there's been a few projects after about 5 or 6 years that have been sold. So, and once they start switching hands, I think a lot of the owners kind of tend to leave it alone and leave it up to the individual, the towns, to take care of that problem. And we always hear about all the good things, environment saving the world, et cetera, but there's the other side of that coin that nobody seems to be addressing. And recycling, to me, it's a big pet peeve. And nobody's addressing that. And our future generations, like I said before, is going to have to address it. And it's not going to be pretty because those are toxic.
Yes, sir. I mean, the panels themselves are not toxic. They're made of...
They could have lead in them. I mean, if they come from China, and most of them do.
The ones we use would just be glass and silicon.
And copper and cadmium.
I mean, copper or aluminum would be used for wiring. A project could be sold. That's, any project could be sold, but whoever holds the state permit must, have that decommissioning bond posted.
I don't want to sound negative, but I mean, that's a fact. That, to me, that's a true life fact, and it needs to be addressed sooner or later, and sooner is better than later.
Okay, Dave, you had another
Yeah,
question?
just had one other question. I think it's for you, Dave, and you mentioned that some folks had raised some issues about this. Did they include the neighbors and the country club and folks?
Well, actually, we have an adjoining landowner here
Okay,
down
he didn't identify himself.
who actually did the email that I sent.
Okay.
We did have residents from the condos or the townhouses that are just north of there, and the folks that live directly across the road to the east that would be, have the bird's eye view of everything.
Okay.
And I'm actually just looking up our town plan language again for solar. We do have some pretty good language in the town plan for it. I mean, I could read it to you and waste all your time, or if you folks wanted to look it up, it's on page 23 of our town plan.
Thank you very much.
Just to be clear, because it's a 45-day notice, we don't really make any judgment on it, but we will provide a letter of input if the board agrees to do that.
And we will get another chance to look at this when the petition is filed.
Did you want to say something? Or?
Well, if the letter has been presented in your package, I did purchase the 4-acre property next to it, which is a very historic building with an old 8,000 square foot 4-story barn that I've been diligently restoring for last year and planning to keep it going for many, many years. But it is the exact site of that site, and there's no way that anything can ever go to show that from our project at all. It's a beautiful old 1890s type of barn, and the old apple barns are still there. It would be tragic to look at that field, especially with all the work that Brandon is doing to bring that back up to the beautiful situation. I hate to see that so close to town. I just was wondering about it.
Sure.
Right.
Sure, absolutely.
Just a quick question, Ed. For us that can't see that far, what's the color key for this?
Okay, so the site on this outline is right here, and prime is green, and this other color is statewide, and then I believe this is what Sam was referring to about the hydrant piece in the middle of the site.
Karen?
I just want to say, Karen Summerlin from Sudbury, I drove by here on my way down tonight, and this feels very much like a residential neighborhood.
Mhm.
It feels very much in your face right here. So I was kind of surprised to, I mean, I've been that way numerous times to visit a friend, but not with the eye of, looking at it from a solar perspective, and it really does feel like a residential neighborhood. Yes.
Lyle Gretchen, Rutland Economic Development. Top of that, you're gonna see that every single time you drive off there. You're not gonna have trees tall enough to block that. But my question, more comment than question, do the Masons still own the building on the corner?
Yes, they do.
Have they been consulted?
One of the select board members is a Mason, and so I think they're fully aware of it.
No, it was brought up at a meeting, but I don't think it was approached, but to the Mason.
Yeah, to the Masons, oh. Dan, have you talked to the Masons?
I have not. I've met with some of the neighbors, but not the Masons.
So I'm sorry, but we are out of time. We have another meeting that starts 5 minutes ago. So what is the pleasure of the board members? Do we want Ed to prepare a letter with the comments that were made? There's a recording, which maybe you can get a copy of. But I guess we would need a motion to have Ed do that.
I'll make a motion that I do a letter.
That
With our
outlines.
comments to the developer, that's the purpose of this.
Tell me quickly what.
Primax soils, residential area, inadequate screening, difficult to screen.
Any others? Grid capacity questions? Grid capacity concerns.
I don't think it was inadequate screening, it was just inability to screen.
Difficult to screen.
It's a different.
Well, on the west side, they could do screening, but they're not proposing any.
And what this letter will just say is, in the petition, please describe how you are going to address
These concerns.
Mark, were you saying one?
I thought I said the
Okay.
Okay, and could you just, for me, again, explain where the letter's going? And again, it's just outlining the concerns that we have, which I agree with, by the way. I think that they need to be raised. But
The letter will go to the developer, to the chair of the planning commission, to the chair of the select board, and to the regional commissioner.
Go to the PUC too?
It goes to the PUC, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay?
Okay, yes, can we get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.